Hi, Chris.
So maybe we could begin, if you wouldn't mind, just telling us a little bit about yourself and how you got started in music and how your career has developed from there.
Yeah, so actually I started music by chance when I was 12 years old. I had to pick a like a co-curricular activity. We call it CCAs, like in school. So actually Chinese orchestra was my third choice, and it wasn't my first choice. So my first two choices were non-music related, and somehow I didn't get my first two choice, and I end up in Chinese orchestra, and that's how I started playing the Chinese flute, also known as 笛子. So that's Chinese flute. And when I was so I played solo, chamber, orchestra in on a Chinese flute. And when I was 20 years old, between 18 to 20 years old, I was in the military service, and I was pending my college studies in the US. So I was thinking, maybe I should start exploring Western music, because I'm heading over there to the United States. I should start learning about Western music, having explored Chinese music for the past 6 years, and I felt that it would be interesting to explore the Western flute, because it's, from Chinese flute to Western flute, I would at least have some help with my background in Chinese flute. Yeah, so that's how I started learning the Western flute. Pretty late, to most people, 19 years old would be quite late for an instrument. About composition, regarding composition, how did I get into composing? I was actually attending concerts a lot, and every time I listen to music, I'll be like thinking about what was the composer thinking, and how is the music going to change? How is the music going to end? And I'm always like thinking about the flow of thoughts in a composer's mind, and I'm thinking about what inspired him, what spurred him to write this. So naturally I wanted to write my own music. Yeah.
I see. And when was that you started composing?
So I started taking my first official composition class in freshman college, which was 20 years old. Yeah, 21 years old. Yeah, so pretty late. Yeah.
Okay. So I'd love to come back for a minute to that transition from Chinese to Western flute, and maybe you could just explain for our audience, what would you say are the main differences, both as a player and as a listener, between the Chinese and the Western flute?
The Chinese flute is a bamboo flute, and we know that for the Western flute, in the Renaissance Baroque, we have wooden flute, sometimes ivory flute, but in the modern day it's metallic, so it's like silver, gold, platinum, silver. So the material is very different, the sound is very different. The Chinese flute has this membrane, has this very thin membrane that is pasted over a sound production hole. So there's this membrane that is very, very critical to the sound of the Chinese flute. If the membrane is actually broken, you can't play a sound. So that's how critical that membrane is. And if it's too loose or too tight, the sound is terrible. So that membrane is what it's so important. Players are so fussy about it. So the Western flute sound, so the Chinese flute sound is very brilliant, very bright. It's a sound of a bamboo. The Western flute has progressed from the wooden flute, which is more quiet. It's a softer, the density is a less dense sound. But of course, the metallic flutes, the modern flutes, are more dense, and really, I would say the sound is more powerful. It really projects. So the sound is very different. And in terms of the sounds and the colors are very different. And in terms of tonality, the Western flute is a chromatic instrument, so it can play 24 keys. So you can play. You just need one flute. You can play all the music. But the Chinese flute is made for specific keys in mind. So you would see a flutist carry like a bag of 6 flutes. So
Okay.
you know, for example, the G flute would be best for G and D, the key of G and D. Yeah. So it becomes a lot harder. Sometimes if there are chromatic notes, the Chinese flutist actually has to like cover half a hole. So he or she has to use the ear and you know decide how much to cover, half a hole, and yeah, it's quite cool. It really trains the ear. Yeah.
So you said that you transitioned to Western flute thinking that you might have a head start, but it sounds like the fingering would be different and the embouchure would be different.
Yes,
Did you find it was any advantage?
No, it was really tough. The only thing that probably helped was I knew how to breathe, diaphragm.
Okay.
I knew how to breathe, and basically everything was different. Fingering was different. I transitioned from Chinese to Western flute. I can't tell you how the experience will be like the other way around, but I realized that from Chinese to Western flute, the tone, to produce a good tone on the Western flute is so much harder. It's so much harder than on the Chinese flute. Yeah. So I spent years. I spent years to improve and really get the tone that I have today. It was tough, but you know, for the Chinese flute, right? You know that membrane. So if the membrane, if you adjust the membrane a little, the sound it just becomes so bright and so perfect that you know the sound can change just by improving the membrane. But the tone is so much better. But the Western flute is really so much harder to produce a good sound. Yeah.
It's all dependent on you.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was my experience.